Hi there. Welcome to The Preventable, the podcast giving you a seat at the table with conversations about the intersection of alcohol, drugs, and mental health in everyday lives. Take a seat and join us.
Welcome to The Preventable. With me today is best-selling author, and I'm so excited to have her here, Jessica Lahey, author of The Addiction Inoculation. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So this is not your first book, correct?
Nope.
You had another book called The Gift of Failure, and you're a teacher by trade.
Yep, 20 years, every grade from 6th to 12th, English, Latin, writing, and then the last 5 years of my teaching were spent in an inpatient rehab, drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents, which I have to say, I think might have been my very favorite post ever. I loved teaching there.
Well, I knew I liked you, and I think that's one of the things that I found so approachable about your book is because you genuinely like kids.
Oh my gosh.
And
yeah,
I really
yeah.
feel like anybody who's a teacher, I'm a middle school teacher by trade, 6th grade is my jam. And not everybody loves middle school, but I think it's the best.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk to teachers because they find the grades that sort of really capture them. And I never thought I would teach middle school, never, ever. In fact, I was in the running for a high school teaching post, and the head of the middle school said, just ask me to come by and meet the kids. Just come see. Mm-hmm. And I did. And that was it. I withdrew my application from the high school, and I'm like, these kids, oh my gosh, I had no idea how wonderful middle school kids could be. Now clearly that's been the sweet spot for me. I just adore middle school.
It's funny because my niece is going into the 6th grade this year. And again, that's what I taught. And I feel like I peaked when I was 12. And I still think my sense of humor is at that level, but it's just such a fun age because they go really quickly from really wanting you to be there and be supportive of them to then only caring about their friends and being embarrassed by you. But then also they'll still give you a hug and grab your hand in really moments of sweetness. Yeah. And they're so awkward, growing into their bodies and figuring things out.
And 6th grade is so different from 7th grade, and 7th grade is so different from 8th grade. And there are these predictable phases they go through that, to the outside could seem really upsetting. In fact, I was talking about this just recently with a friend, which is at the end of 8th grade, when these kids were going to leave and have to go off to high school, which can be really scary for them, they would often push back and just act out and be mean or whatever that thing was. And the consolation for me was knowing that they trusted me enough to know that they could push back against me and I would still be there for them. And they needed to push back against someone, but they could only do it with someone that they really trusted. And so, even those moments where you just want to get annoyed with them for being little jerks, you realize that there is a specific reason for that behavior. And if you can get inside what that reason is, then you're going to be in much better shape, both from a teaching perspective, from a trauma-informed teaching perspective, and from all different angles. It's a cool age.
Well, and I think when you can understand the why of why someone's behavior is the way it is, right. And why not why are you acting that way? But really why are you responding in this way? Or why are you thinking that I'm yelling at you even when I'm asking you to take out the trash, right? And what I love about your book is that you approach brain science and give some background as to why kids need supportive adults, why they need open and honest communication, why certain things impact them the way that they do, why drugs impact their brain at a different rate and speed. You do that in a very digestible way. And at Prevent+Ed, we do a lot of, we lean on Dr. David Walsh a lot, Dr. Perry, because they break down the brain science piece in a way that people can understand and that makes you go, oh,
yeah.
And you do that too.
Well,
have you always loved the brain science piece of it?
Adolescent brain development I could talk about it for ages. And luckily I have two best friends who I tend to text a lot. Every single day we talk about our writing and what we're working on, and I can information dump on them so that I don't have to dump it on my reader. Or I have a wonderful agent and a wonderful editor at HarperCollins that they all understand that my writing is a process of putting way more out there than the reader needs and then pulling back and making it really digestible. So all of the brain science stuff started out as a chapter that was probably 3 times as long as it is now. And, and it's a process of winnowing away, oh, okay, well, I would love to explain that, but really your average reader just is not going to care about that. Or, how do I tell this in a way that makes sense? What are the analogies? What are the metaphors? That kind of thing. And, I'm a huge dork. I mean, I think as far as I'm concerned, I have the best job in the world, which is to get curious about things, research them to death, and then translate them for people that don't really care about the details and want the big picture. And
right.
I love that. I love being in that place. That's always been at the heart of my journalism, of my books, all of it.
Well, I was reading the chapter on brain science and I'm like, yes, yes, like this is what we teach. And this is required, this should be required reading.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I really think that we are adding it and I'm not saying this just to butter you up. This will be put on our new employee reading list.
Oh, lovely.
Because I do think it breaks it down and it toggles the line between being kind of like an autobiography, but also being really informative and giving the why behind why these things matter and why these conversations are so critical.
That's actually my favorite intersection. What I like to read the most is the intersection of memoir and research-backed nonfiction.
Totally
and I
agree.
have shelves full of that particular type of literature. It's just my favorite.
Well, this to me was a page turner. So what I think is really nice as somebody who does not have biological children is that, sometimes we will be talking about building assets in kids or having healthy conversations with kiddos. And people will say, well, I'm not a parent. Well, it's also, as you say, in the cover of your book, you don't have to be a parent. Because you might have nieces or nephews or neighborhood kids, or maybe you're a teacher or, you're a coach, you're a pediatrician. Like all of these things, you might not have kids, but there are kids in your life.
Yeah, the research is really clear that when kids have one adult that they can look to for support, one adult that sees them for who they are, really for who they are, and supports them for who they are and not who we wish they were, that those kids, no matter what kind of trauma they've been through in their early life, will actually fare much better later on in life. And that's true across the board, for kids who've experienced trauma, kids who haven't, kids who, for substance use prevention, it's incredibly important. For getting kids out of intergenerational poverty, it's really important. There's a wonderful book by Valerie Maholmes that talks about the fact that one of the most important tools we have to help get kids out of poverty is hope. And hope is something that kids often look to an adult in their lives to give them. And anyway, so there's all kinds of reasons that anyone who mentors children should be thinking about, the ways they're mentoring those children and the ways that they can be really useful in from everything from substance use prevention to learning and engaging in school to just allowing that kid to be the best version of themselves and the truest form of who that kid wants to be.
So I know the answer, but because I've read the book, but did you just do research and decide that this is a book that you wanted to write? You are a parent of 2, correct?
Yes.
So did this come out of just realizing that what you were seeing, or how did this book sort of spring up for you?
So everything I write comes out of very personal questions I have, whether it's about my own students or my own kids or my own teaching. And that was what was really fun about my education journalism. But so I wrote Gift of Failure. That was based on really specific questions I had about my students and my own children. And then I took some time where I was out speaking about Gift of Failure a lot and didn't know what I was going to do next. And in the meantime, I had gotten sober in, my sober date is June 7th, 2013, about the time
Congratulations.
About the time I sold The Gift of Failure. And at that point, once I sort of wrapped my arms around my own sobriety and started getting a handle on that, I had to come to terms with the fact that I am the child of alcoholics and my parent is a child of an alcoholic and so on and so on. And same thing on my husband's side of the family. And we know that substance abuse, a substance use disorder actually is the terminology we're supposed to use, it is in part genetic. And so I wanted to understand how do I up the chances that I can end this with me? How can I be the last in line in my particular family? And the powers that be, the experts out there say, quote, substance use disorder is preventable, but that word preventable is massive. And what does it mean? And what's a myth? What is true? There are things I did with my older kid because I believed I was doing the best at the time that were, absolutely counter to preventing substance use disorder in my children. So I just wanted to look into everything without having a horse in any particular race, which is, I like to look at everything and try to come at it with an unbiased opinion. And then, from a place of without bias, and then weigh the evidence and filter through what actually works and what doesn't work. And then put that in a framework that people can understand.
You were pretty, I would say, forthcoming and really, I think, open about your journey to sobriety, your relationship with alcohol, and how it sort of it was insidious and sort of crept up.
It really did.
And that other people were noticing, but it wasn't I don't exactly remember how you said it, but basically you weren't out on the street.
Right. No, not that many people noticed, actually. I had to convince.
Oh yeah, you had to tell people no, this actually is a thing with me.
Yeah.
Right?
My husband suspected, my friends really didn't. I was so good at hiding it. And I'm one of those, and I hate using this terminology, but I have what people in recovery will often refer to as a high bottom, in the fact that my bottom was the bottom for me, in the sense that I had it. I'd had enough. I was sick. I was anxious. I was exhausted. I couldn't maintain the facade anymore. I couldn't maintain the lies and the secrecy. And my kids were getting old enough that they were going to notice soon. I had a lot of not yets. I was very fortunate. But all those things, all those bad things were just about to happen. I'd crossed a lot of lines that I'd drawn in the sand and said, oh, I'd never do that. But I had started to do all of those things. And so I was just about the heavens were about to sort of crash down on me. And so it was definitely time. So when my dad actually intervened on me, in 2013, at that point, it was the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place for me. And I didn't have any excuses left. And I 100% knew I needed help. And I went to a 12-step meeting that night. And, I was very fortunate in that I got sober and have stayed sober and have a really supportive community around me. But yeah, it was, for me, if I'm going to talk about something, I have to be 100% honest, which means that a lot of people who love me found out things for the first time that I'd been hiding for a long time. When my husband, when my husband read the book actually for the first time, because he doesn't read my work until it's done. When he read it for the first time, he was like, wow, this is a lot of new information. And it really was. So, but from I work at a rehab now, actually, for not for kids, but for adults. And I often say to them, being very public about this and being very honest about this is part of what keeps me sober. It may not be everyone's desired path, but it keeps me accountable to a lot of people. And, once you've talked about your alcoholism in a 3-page spread in People magazine, there's sort of no going back. And I prefer to keep it that way.
I mean, that it's almost like you have a script of sort of the questions I've been coming up with as I was reading the book, because, you know, we have several people on staff and we work with several people who are in long-term recovery and they're peers. And so it's part of their journey to be very open and honest and transparent about their journey, because that's basically in their job description. Right. And so when you put it out there that you're a person in long-term recovery and that this is, you know, that this was your journey, I often wonder if and when you're like tired of telling the story. Like, is there a point where you are like, yes, and?
No, mainly because so I do a lot of speaking, and part of my speaking is explaining, whether I'm talking about gift to failure or addiction inoculation, and I often tend to do a dovetail of the two. Explaining to people that I'm in recovery myself is a really important part of that story. And every single time I reveal that publicly, I get emails, I get texts, and I give people, usually to the audiences that I speak to, I give them my contact information so they can get in touch with me. And so I have this ongoing sort of running, whether it's DMs coming in from Twitter, where I leave my DMs open, whether it's people who email me because I gave out my email address somewhere, all of the people who come to the rehab where I work, get my phone number, my cell number, and my email. And I have been incredibly privileged to be a part of a lot of people's getting to the place that needed to get to in order to ask for help. I never, ever discount the importance of that position and the privilege of that position. And it has been, not only does it help keep me accountable to other people, it gives me an opportunity to serve. It gives me an opportunity to be of service to other people who may be in a similar situation that I was in. And that's a massive part of what I do. And it means so much to me that if telling my, you know, if I were to ever to get, you know, tired of my story, I would continue telling it anyway. It's just too important. There are a lot, and I have to say, there's also a privilege piece here where, like, I am a white, you know, financially stable woman who is, when I tell my story, people say, "Oh, you're so brave for telling your story."
Right.
Whereas for a lot of people, you know, for example, someone who's in poverty, someone who is a person of color, especially, you know, you picture someone like a Black single mom and they come out and say, you know, I'm an alcoholic. That's just, for a lot of people, can be an extra strike against them. And whereas I tend to get the benefit of the doubt, and I feel like it's extra important for me to be out there telling my story in order to make it easier for other people to be public, to be unashamed, and about, you know, whether it's drug and alcohol addiction, you know, that kind of stuff. It's important to be able to talk about these things.
It is important. And I think for all of the reasons you mentioned, and also because when people think, still in 2022, when people think of somebody who has struggled with a substance and has a substance use disorder, someone like yourself doesn't pop into their brain. Like, there is still so much stigma, and that is evolving.
Yeah.
And it continues to evolve because people like yourself are so open and saying, like, look, I'm educated. I did this, and this. I did everything right. And yet. And so the more that people are open about their stories and shows all the faces of recovery and what that looks like, then hopefully that's how, you know, we can move the needle. But it bothers me that we're not further along because we've been working at this for so long. Does that bother you? Or,
you know, I'm looking at this through this weird lens where I know that there are a lot of people who are in recovery out there that are willing to tell their stories. You know, Stephen King in, you know, On Writing talks about his recovery story. And there's a great line in there about, you know, we all pretty much look the same when we're barfing in the gutter. So, which is absolutely true. But there are so many people that are out there writing recovery memoirs. There are a lot of celebrities who are willing to talk about their issues with drugs and alcohol and mental health health issues. I think it's improving. I really, really do. You know, we're having a moment when being curious about sobriety is something that you can approach without like this label of alcoholic over your head. You know, we're in a place now where there's sober October and dry January. And I meet so many people who are like, you know what, I think I'm going to, you know, just stop drinking for a month and see what that's like. It just doesn't feel good in my body. And that's a really cool place to be. And then we have a lot of role models out there who are, well, if you choose to, you know, see celebrity or whatever as role models, but people who are willing to talk about their mental health issues now in a way that I have not seen in the past. And I tend to be very optimistic given that it's becoming a part of, you know, our discussion, it's becoming a part of the zeitgeist.
It is. And I think, or I know that being open and honest and transparent and direct about your story is a huge part of your book and your approach with your own children. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I would like to talk about in the next episode, if you'll stick around.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So if you like what you're hearing and you're like, wait, I want to keep listening, please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to The Preventable.
Thanks for joining us at The Preventable, brought to you ad-free by Prevent+Ed. Prevent+Ed works to reduce or prevent the harms of alcohol and other drug use through education, intervention, and advocacy. Please visit their website at prevented.org. Like what you heard? Rate, review, and subscribe to stay up to date with what we are serving on The Preventable.